So for those questions, Gabrielle, welcome. You're up next. It's lovely to have you here with us today. So in her role with the Victorian government, Gabrielle works with the energy industry to help develop the sustainable energy future. And with qualifications, I don't know how you get qualifications in engineering, finance and humanities, but that's a discussion for another day. But you have 25 years experience across technical and commercial fields. I've done something wrong, so I'm going to hand it over here. And currently oversees a team with sector participants to attract new energy business into Victoria. And what you're going to do is start to bring together all of this, of what we've been talking about this morning. So that's a big task. Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome and introduction and opportunity to be here today. Very excited to talk to you today about some of the work that the Victorian Government is doing and how it relates to the region here and what some of the economic opportunities are. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting, and that's the Wadawurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and Aboriginal elders from other communities who might be here today. So the energy sector is undergoing a fundamental change. I think we've discussed that already today, and that involves sort of all areas of it, from the way it's generated, transported, stored, paid for and used, to the way the whole market operates. So there's a lot of change in a lot of areas, and as a department we have to keep our eye on all of these things and help sort of direct to make sure that we keep the lights on and energy affordable in the process. And the change is being driven by the urgent need to move to renewable energy sources and net zero gas emissions, as well as by fast changing behaviours and expectations of users, and the equally rapid development of technology. And to fully embrace the opportunities of the clean energy revolution has for this region, we need to look at high growth new technologies such as wind, solar, large scale storage and even electric vehicles. And the last part of my presentation, I'm also going to just delve a bit into renewable hydrogen, and that's drawing a lot of attention as an emerging energy carrier with a lot of opportunity for new industries, as well as solving some of our existing problems. And let's start by looking at our legislated targets for both renewable energy and emissions. So through the Climate Change Act 2017, Victorians made it a legislated goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And last year the state announced our climate change strategy, and that includes interim emissions reduction targets for Victoria. And through these targets we'll see a 28 to 33% reduction on 2005 levels by 2025, and by 2030 we expect to see a fall of 45 to 50%. So these legislated targets provide a clear roadmap for governments, businesses and households to make informed decisions and invest for the future. And we can see we're working well along that path. Emissions fell by nearly 25% between 2005 and 2019. But also noting that over the same period, the economy grew by 43.4%. And jobs grew by 38%. So that dispels the myth that you can't reduce emissions while maintaining strong growth in jobs and the economy. So we've already exceeded our first Victorian renewable energy target, which was 25% of electricity generation by 2020, and we're well on our way of achieving our second of 40% by 2025. Victoria's share of renewable energy generation actually reached a new high recently of over 32%. And that was a surge of from 26.6% in 2020. This generation of Victoria jumped by 3.8 terawatt hours in 2021, and that was the largest increase of its kind in our state's history. So we're really rocketing along that trajectory to net zero emissions. We expect our third target of 50% by 2030 to create about 24,500 jobs between 2020 and 2030 in Victoria. And we were the leading Australian state for large-scale wind and solar generation in 2021, with a total of over 10,000 gigawatt hours, and we continue to lead in 2022. In April, our state reached a new record share of renewables, and that peaked at 83.8% of state demand on Easter Sunday, so happy Easter. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about how the Victorian renewable energy targets provide long-term policy certainty, particularly to the private sector that's investing in our state's renewable energy industry, and make sure that it's viable. As I said earlier, we've already achieved our first Victorian renewable energy target and are well on our way to achieving our second. And the projects delivered under the first Victorian renewable energy target, or VRET for short, auction, have successfully brought forward more than 800 megawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity, and they've created new jobs and diverted over 3.5 million tonnes of emissions. Our second auction is currently underway, and we expect that to deliver at least 600 megawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity, and that'll help us meet our commitment of sourcing 100% renewable energy for all Victorian government operations by 2025, which is not very far away. It'll support 2,000 new jobs and attract an estimated $1 billion in capital investment right across the state. And the government recognises that it's important to have a mix of renewable energy generation sources, and not all need to be on land where there may be competing land uses. So I'm hinting here at offshore wind. So picking the technologies and programs to complement our existing resources gives us the best return on investment. Victoria is fortunate to have world-class offshore wind resources, including a lengthy coastline, consistent wind speeds and expertise in maritime engineering and, of course, offshore energy operations, thanks to our oil and gas legacy. And in November 2021, we made Australia's biggest ever offshore wind announcement, and that's $40 million in funding for 3 projects with the potential to deliver more than 5,500 jobs and $18 billion in investment. And in March this year, we announced the Victorian Offshore Wind Policy Directions paper, setting the first offshore wind targets in Australian history. And in that paper, we committed to at least 2 gigawatts of offshore wind in Victoria by 2032, and with a stretch goal of first power by 2028, following a competitive process. So more locally in the Grampians region, we've got a unique position in regional Victoria to support this growth in our renewable energy journey and contribute to the achievement of Victoria's renewable energy targets. So with access to both excellent wind and solar resources, we can accommodate large-scale facilities of both types, in addition to small-scale rooftop solar systems. Existing rooftop solar farms, wind farms and bioenergy power stations in the region have up to 1,500 megawatts of renewable energy capacity. And the solar farms and wind farms under construction or approved, combined with a full rollout of rooftop solar across the region, would add a further 4,500 megawatts of capacity. So for those in the region, it's no surprise that we've got an excellent wind resource here, and as a result it dominates Victoria in its wind capacity. And when looking at the total number of projects proposed, planned, under construction or operational, Grampians has around just under 6,500 megawatts in the pipeline. And this includes Australia's largest wind farm project proposal to date, and that's the $3 billion, 1,300 megawatt Golden Plains wind farm, which, once constructed, would can power more than $750,000 homes, and also combined with the 300 megawatt big battery to provide storage, which is obviously emerging as sort of the need with a lot of big generation in the state. We need to make sure that we can balance out those the times when it's generating and the times that it's not. To date, there are very few large-scale solar farms operating in the region, but there is the potential, obviously, through the Solar Homes program, which I'll talk about in a little bit, for a lot of small-scale solar. The high voltage transmission lines running through the region is more than 90 kilometres, and there is a high voltage transmission line, and no part of the region is more than 90 kilometres from a high voltage power line. The Victorian Government is sourcing renewable energy certificates from a number of projects through our Renewable Certificate Purchasing Initiative, including the 31 megawatt Kyoto wind farm located 50 kilometres northwest of Horsham in the Grampians. As a major hub for Victoria's wind industry, the Grampians has the opportunity to build on the growing wind energy technician training offered at Fed Uni and further develop the supply chain opportunities in component manufacturing, assembly, servicing and repairs. For example, there's a local company, SJ Weir, who'd worked with Keppel Prince Engineering from Portland to build Fed Uni's new wind turbine training tower, and global company Altatech has set up Ballarat to repair wind turbine blades. As I mentioned, Grampians has good access to solar resources, and the community continues to contribute to the huge uptake of rooftop solar across the state. More than 37,000 households have taken up solar photovoltaic rebates through the Victorian Solar Home programs in total this year. And since it commenced in August 2018, the program has helped nearly 200,000 Victorian households to install solar PV, the battery or hot water system, helping them to take control of their energy costs and bringing down greenhouse gas emissions. And thanks to the program, more than 1.2 gigawatts of additional solar capacity has been installed across Victoria. But there's also benefits for business, and under Victorian Government's Solar for Business program, which was launched in June 2021, this has already been taken up by over 1,500 businesses across Victoria, and this includes rebates that cover up to 50% of the cost of a rooftop solar systems, and businesses are eligible for a maximum rebate of $3,500 to reduce the upfront cost of installing solar on their premises, and eligible businesses have the option of an interest-free loan. I've just included a case study there of farmers John and Kate who decided to install solar with a 7.5 kilowatt solar system in February 2020, and an industrial solar hot water system at about the same time. And John estimates that these savings will pay off the solar PV and hot water systems within 2 years, which is pretty fast, pretty good return on investment. While we're talking about solar, I just wanted to share with you the concept of agri-solar, which has quickly taken off in Australia as a form of solar grazing, which is becoming the predominant form of land co-use, both here and internationally. I think Alistair shared a map earlier on which was looking at sort of different uses of the land. I think it's really exciting to sort of say you don't have to choose one or the other. There are instances where actually co-locating can provide co-benefits, and that includes the provision of partial shading and weather protection, including sun, hail and wind, can help protect the earth, can help protect the crops underneath from sun damage and extreme weather events, reduce soil temperature on hot days, and it improves soil moisture retention, and that can help improve vegetation growth for crops beneath the panels, or as you can see here, sheep's feeding underneath, particularly if there are dry conditions. You've still got some sort of good grass growing underneath. So this agri-solar is fast becoming a popular concept internationally as more densely populated countries pursue a clean energy transition, with innovations such as elevated photovoltaic panels, greenhouses and rooftops being developed to accommodate different types of agricultural practices. Other forms of agri-solar are emerging which support horticulture, viticulture, aquaculture and various cropping activities, and the agriculture and renewable energy sectors are working in partnership to inspire new ways in which the sectors can work together, to no longer have to choose between the two, but rather explore ways to maximise the productivity of the land and also improve agricultural output and quality. So I'm just going to touch on energy storage. So the success of our large-scale and household solar projects has been complemented by the significant progress we've made in battery and energy storage. And batteries improve the reliability of our electricity network and help fill the gaps as we move towards a modern energy system built on renewables. So large utility scale batteries provide that storage to help stabilise the grid and maintain a reliable and affordable energy supply. And as Victorian Government, we've supported a number of battery projects in Victoria. And one example is a 300 megawatt Victorian big battery in Geelong. That's the largest lithium-ion Tesla battery in the Southern Hemisphere, and that was launched in December last year. And during the peak summer months, that reserves 80% of its capacity to increase the power flow through the Victoria-New South Wales interconnector. So you can see a battery located all the way down in Geelong can help our flows sort of between states. And this helps reduce the chances of unscheduled power outages, for instance, if one of our coal-fired generator fails. Several years ago, researchers at the Australian National University identified several thousand potential pumped hydro sites in Victoria, and almost all of them were in the Victorian Alps, but there are some more locally, and noting that chemical batteries only perform optimally for around 12 to 24 hours, so complementary longer-term storage can be helpful in stabilising the grid. There's also our team sort of heard about some developers that are looking at biogas peakers using straw, offal and wastewater sludges from the Ballarat wastewater treatment plant. So there are other innovative projects in development. The Victorian Government's $25 million energy storage initiative supported two utility-scale battery projects, including a 30 megawatt or 30 megawatt hour system connected directly to a vital grid intersection at a substation right here near Ballarat. And on a smaller scale, neighbourhood scale batteries and microgrids that empower communities to take control of their own energy needs. As a state, we're providing up to $11 million in funding for neighbourhood batteries via the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative, and this includes support for pilots and demonstrations of a range of neighbourhood scale battery ownership and operational models. And to date, 16 community, local councils and industry projects across Victoria have been awarded grants totalling $3.68 million, and round 2 of the Neighbourhood Battery Initiative grant program opened of 6th of June this year, and we've got available up to $2.32 million in grant funding to implement neighbourhood scale batteries, including installation and commissioning, to demonstrate the ability to access multiple value streams. And for anyone that's interested, applications close on the 29th of July this year, and there's a link here to the website for more details. It's important to remember that after power generation, transport is Victoria's biggest source of emissions, and to address that, we're investing in zero-emission vehicles with a $100 million package of programs and policies to make sure that Victoria is availing of opportunities in this area. Means all new public buses will be zero-emission vehicles by 2025. We've also pledged that all Victorian operations, and that includes metropolitan trams, trains, schools, hospitals and more, will be powered by 100% renewable energy by 2025. We've got a zero-emission vehicle subsidy, that's $3,000 per vehicle, that was introduced in May 2021 to encourage the uptake of zero-emission vehicles to help further push down emissions, and our aim is for 50% of all new car sales to be zero-emission vehicles by 2030, and this program is providing 20,000 subsidies over 3 years. This is a $46 million investment in Victoria's transition to a clean energy future. And of course, put a photo there, the electrification of other than passenger vehicles, including agricultural machinery, including tractors, is gaining momentum around the world. So, as I mentioned, I'm just going to touch on hydrogen, particularly of the renewable kind. So, Victorian Government has a vision for renewable hydrogen to be part of our clean economy and our transition to a net zero emission future. And last year we released a renewable hydrogen industry development plan to help guide this emerging sector. We believe Victoria's got all the right elements for establishing a strong domestic hydrogen market, and that's in part due to our extensive gas networks, highly skilled gas workforce, renewable energy resources, world-class education and research institutions, strong international collaboration links through industry and academia, connected transport networks and export-ready infrastructure, including deep water ports. And one of the biggest opportunities we see for renewable hydrogen is, of course, in our regions. There are opportunities for various types of hydrogen development, including hydrogen from biomass. And unlike hydrogen from an electrolyser, which can be done at small scale, scale is important here when you're using bioenergy. So developers are seeking 600,000 tonnes of woody biomass per year to produce 100,000 tonnes of green ammonia. And then there's a green triangle just to the west and south of the Grampians. There's the potential for pine plantations to provide additional biomass once the timber has been harvested. So Victorian Government is supporting several key initiatives to establish a renewable hydrogen economy, and this includes the recently announced Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative, a significant investment in renewable hydrogen transport, and I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. Victorian Government awarded its first ever dedicated renewable hydrogen grants earlier this year, and that included $6.6 million for the Renewable Hydrogen Commercialisation Pathways Fund to cover a number of projects that will see hydrogen used in real-world applications, and more than $600,000 for the Renewable Hydrogen Business Ready Fund, and that's for feasibility studies and business cases for industries to transition to using renewable hydrogen. We're also funding 4 hydrogen technology clusters across the state and bringing together players in each region, and that's in the Mallee, Greater Geelong in the southwest, Gippsland and Clayton. We also established a Victorian hydrogen technology cluster network, including a network manager, and that brings these 4 clusters together, including their around 150 businesses. Victorian Government has also developed an Energy Innovation Fund, and that makes over $90 million in funding for transformational energy projects. And we've got a number of other projects funded through the Victorian Higher Education State Investment Fund, and that includes the Victorian Hydrogen Hub in Clayton, Deakin University's High Cell facility in Warrnambool. We've got University of Melbourne Zero Emissions Energy Lab, and Swinburne University of Technology's Air Hub. Hume Hydrogen Highway, which was announced in March, this is a $20 million grant program to deliver Australia's first ever renewable hydrogen refuelling network along our busiest freight corridor, the Hume Highway between Melbourne and Sydney. And we're partnering with the New South Wales Government on this. Each of us chipped in $10 million in grant funding, and we will be with the aim of delivering at least 4 renewable hydrogen fuelling stations and around 25 hydrogen-powered trucks to use this network. Beyond the initial deployment, we're also hoping the highway will expand into a full East Coast renewable hydrogen refuelling freight network, covering major freight routes across Victoria and linking us to New South Wales, further to Queensland, and hopefully to South Australia as well. The program will provide benefits to Victoria, and particularly sort of in the regions where the refuelling stations are, supporting regional investment and job creation in reducing our transport emissions. We've got already supported several hydrogen transport projects, including the recently announced Viva New Energy service station in Geelong that includes 15 fuel cell electric vehicles. And the Hume Hydrogen Highway program will complement existing and planned initiatives to provide hydrogen refuelling coverage along Victoria's major freight corridor. And we hope to build on these routes in future, as I mentioned, between Melbourne and Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide to Sydney, which goes across the top of our state. In the Grampians region, sort of looking at the potential for hydrogen, we've got strong wind resources, as I mentioned, a busy truck route along the Western Highway, good access to potential alternative water sources and industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, transport, warehousing that may be well suited to using hydrogen. One of the first and most significant opportunities in hydrogen is heavy transport. It's basically because once you actually buy the infrastructure, hydrogen produced is close to cost parity with diesel, so it becomes a bit of a no-brainer. The hydrogen is a potential replacement for diesel also in agricultural settings. And presents a strong opportunity to also potentially support the grid electricity network. So areas affected by outages or low voltage transmission lines could benefit for hydrogen to store energy and back up power generation projects, but it becomes most commercial when you use the hydrogen directly, whether for sort of heat sources in industry or for transport. Obviously, using large-scale batteries is a more efficient way of storing and feeding back into the grid currently. Okay, just quickly, just going to talk about quickly the gas substitution roadmap. Victoria accounts for 35% of domestic gas use in the East Coast gas market, and that's why the Victorian Government is developing a gas substitution roadmap, and that will provide a strategic framework for decarbonising our natural gas network in Victoria, and that's with consumer choice, affordability and reliability at the centre. A combination of technologies such as energy efficiency, electrification, hydrogen and biomethane will all be considered to meet the energy needs of Victoria's diverse gas users. And renewable gases are likely to be an important part of our future energy mix, particularly for industrial gas users. And we're exploring what needs to happen to decarbonise our gas networks right across the state. So in conclusion, I just wanted to sort of summarise by saying there's a lot of potential and there's clearly a lot happening. I've run through quite a lot of information here and I've probably gone wildly over time. But we're trying as Victorian Government to coordinate all these different parts and provide certainty for investors and help to sort of clarify the way when there's a lot of different moving parts. Our ambition is to make Victoria Australia's clean energy leader and a reliable renewable energy investment destination in the Southern Hemisphere. And of course, having local benefits is one of the keys to doing what we're doing. We're really keen to make sure that we both keep the energy reliable and affordable and make sure that there are local benefits. So thanks for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Gabrielle. I'll open to the floor. I was really interested in your last comment on gas.
Yep.
Firstly, actually, hydrogen. I missed that hydrogen that Hume announced.
Okay.
I'm going to do my research on that.
Yep.
That's fascinating. Is there any talk as to hydrogen potentially using?
Yep.
David will probably laugh at me, probably don't see this. I just haven't heard that conversation happening anymore. Is that because we've moved? Or?
It's still being explored. Victorian Government was one of the founding partners of the Australian Hydrogen Centre, and they've been conducting some feasibility studies, so theoretical studies looking at hydrogen gas blending up to 10% in regional towns in Victoria, across the state, and what an 100% hydrogen conversion would look like. There's also Australian Gas Infrastructure Group has been doing a project, the Hydrogen Park Murray Valley projects in Wodonga, and that's actually proposing to blend renewable hydrogen produced locally at the local wastewater treatment plant in Wodonga into the natural gas grid that supplies both Wodonga and Albury. So there are real-world projects looking at what it will mean, and also these studies, which we expect will be released to the public soon. They're currently with ARENA, who's a major funder there, will help inform what some of the technical challenges are and what some of the opportunities are. One of the things just to consider is that the current transmission network is not, hydrogen ready. Hydrogen embrittles the metal that a lot of our pipelines are made of. The newer pipelines that are made of more plastic, a little bit more easy to convert. But you need to look at how you transport it, making sure that that's all safe. But you also need to look at the end use appliances. And so whether that's domestic appliances, whether that's industrial appliances, you can blend up to about 10%, and happy days, because the standards allow for more than that for appliances. But once you get more than that, it's a little bit of a complicated journey between 10% and 100%. If you've got a whole 100%, you exchange all your appliances. If you've got up to 10%, you can keep the same ones. But how do you bridge the gap in the middle? So there's definitely a lot of conversation happening. I think the next step will be release of the feasibility studies through the Australian Hydrogen Centre, and I imagine that will spark more conversation. I think we don't currently have a specific policy around community energy. Obviously, you know, our system is completely privatised as a nation. I think in some other countries it's a different mix that, you know, sort of governments can still own and directly operate sort of some of the system. For good or ill, the Victorian government let go of the reins quite some time ago in a decentralised kind of area. So, you know, we obviously provide sort of certain incentives. There are targets that we are keen to see overall. The regulation sort of the distribution and transmission networks is actually centrally managed across the national electricity market. So the Victorian government sort of as such is really fairly hands-off when it comes to specifically what we control in those areas.
Yeah, so I don't mean sort of in terms of government ownership, I think community ownership, I think communities are being able to invest in resources.
Yes.
But as a policy setting.
Yeah. So I was just sort of trying to explain the context. I do understand where your question was going, just in terms of what we have direct within our influence and control, you know, and obviously, you know, with the private sector owning all of the poles and wires and all of the retailers being privatised as well. You know, we're very much sort of leaving the market to determine how it should best sort of operate sort of in that system. Obviously, we're looking at, I think Alistair sort of might have had it on one of his graphs as well, but looking at, you know, sort of where there might be opportunities for sort of, you know, off-grid or microgrids and sort of decentralised sort of supply and demand in sort of islanded operations. But we don't have any current policy settings looking at, you know, targets or specific areas for community-owned infrastructure. It's an interesting one. I think we're realising, you know, very, very quickly that storage is such an integral part of our future energy mix. If we need to move to away from, you know, fossil fuels and towards renewable energy, which is intermittent, then we really sort of need the storage. We don't currently have, you know, sort of any stated storage targets. It's obviously we're looking at all the different mechanisms that we need in terms of what kinds of storage we might need and where and how we might incentivise that. But you know, there's not currently anything in the works, but believe you me, we're looking right across our grid at what we need and what's going to be needed for us to help us get there.
I bet you are. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, well done. Thank you.